Don't touch that dial. Welcome back to the Behind the Bits podcast. I'm still Scott Curtis, and we're up to episode 4. My guest on this episode is Marc Sheffler, and boy, was he a real get. This was a great interview. So when Mark was 10, his dad got the Three Stooges to perform for his birthday. And when Mo dubbed him the fourth Stooge, he knew what he wanted to do with his life, and that's a career in comedy, of course. As he got older, he went to the Catskills to work with some comics there as stage manager and all that. And when he got thrown into doing it himself, he just fell in love with doing stand-up comedy. He was one of the first people at the Comedy Store, one of the first comics there, along with Jay Leno, Letterman, and all those folks. And his name's inscribed on the Wall of Fame. And that kind of led him to a writing career that lasted for decades. His film claim to fame, though, is his portrayal of Junior Stillo in the cult classic from Wes Craven, Last House on the Left, and that's the 1972 original version. He's written for television and movies such as Sister Sister, Who's the Boss, Harry and the Hendersons, and many others. Mark also teaches comedy writing for the screen at Loyola. His love for stand-up has brought him back to the stage as Al Yid. Check out Mark and character in the show notes. Thanks for listening to the podcast. I'm hoping to put out something that is good for all the comics out there. If you like what you hear, shoot me a note at scott@thebtbpc.com. If you don't like what you hear, you can do the same thing. We are on Facebook at Behind the Bits Podcast. We are on Twitter at the BTBPC. And we are on Instagram at Behind the Bits Podcast. You can follow me on all those places. I'm really enjoying putting these out and would love to get some feedback. If you think you'd be a good guest or you know a good guest, shoot me an email or a message on Facebook. I'll be glad to talk to you. So without further ado, here is Marc Sheffler. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Behind the Bits podcast. This is Scott Curtis, and today I have Marc Sheffler with me. How you doing, Mark?
I'm okay. I'm quite okay, actually.
Yeah. Well, I think you're in a warmer climate than me. I think, Mark, you're in Bogota?
No, actually, I am in a place called Santa Marta, Colombia, which is on the Atlantic Ocean, sitting in a wonderfully air-conditioned, king-size hotel room, staring at the Atlantic Ocean.
Fantastic.
My sister-in-law and our niece are at some beach doing something.
Well, that's great. And I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me. We talked a little bit before, and you don't know me, and I just pegged you for an interview, and you were nice enough to get it scheduled on just a few days after we talked. So that's great.
Not a problem. I told you, you name drop Tom Dreesen, and that usually get my.
I'm so glad I got him first so that I can use him for everybody. I think it's helped me a lot. So I just got done listening to your Eddie's Bar at the Improv interview.
Yes, sir.
And I listened to it. I listened to the last half this morning when I was on my way back home. And obviously, you have had a pretty interesting career. Without having to ask you everything that Eddie asked you, I did want to have the folks hear the story of your Three Stooges birthday party.
Okay. I actually made a mistake on that show, not about the Three Stooges, about the date. So I'm gonna now roll with the date that somebody corrected me on. It wasn't my 8th birthday because they didn't appear till it was my 10th birthday. But
okay.
I still have the pictures. So what happened was I was a huge Three Stooges fan. You know, I'm 70 years old, so you're going back 60 years.
Mm-hmm.
Though their shorts were what we watched every day after school, and I always had this thing about being funny because I recognized it at an early age that if you're a funny person, most people will like you, and big people will defend you, and nobody will mess with you. And so I kind of got into that. So in the run up to my 10th birthday, my dad, like parents do, said, "What do you want for your birthday?" So I just kind of like, ad-libbed. I said, the Three Stooges. And he got them for me. Turns out they were playing a date at the Holiday House in Pittsburgh. And he got a hold of them and offered them some money to do a Saturday afternoon birthday party for me. And we had 50, 60 people there. They did their act, and in the middle of it, they brought me up on stage. And since I knew all the material, I started interacting with them, like doing their bits. And they were a little surprised, and then they rolled with it. So at some point, Mo just stopped, put his hand on my head, and dubbed me the fourth Stooge. In that moment, which I can remember like it was yesterday, I remember what it felt like. I'm standing on a stage. There's a mic on a mic stand in front of me. I'm holding onto the mic stand. I'm hearing laughter bounce back at me. I feel the lights on my face. I can't see shit because, you've been on stage, you know what that's like. So, but I heard the laughter. I heard the applause. And I think from that moment forward, I just kind of aimed myself in this direction. I said, fuck, this is it, man. This is what I want to do.
That story is great. And one thing that you can talk to all generations about is the Three Stooges. If you mention the Three Stooges, everybody knows about that. There's a big gap for me when I talk to some of the younger comics about, I tried to put a TV show into one of my bits, and I was trying to put a TV show that they would remember. So I'm going Dukes of Hazzard, Chips, and all that kind of stuff. And nobody even remembered the movies, let alone the shows. But you talk about Three Stooges, and they definitely make an impact.
Well, the three, in the world of comedy, the Three Stooges are kind of iconic. I mean, they've got shit that, like Mo Larry the Cheese, Niagara Falls, all that stuff that they used to do that that they brought from their vaudeville act to the stage and I mean to the screen, and figured out how to do those exact same things in a different medium. That's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, it's really cool. So after that, before I go any further, I told everybody that I listened to Eddie's Bar at the Improv, your interview there. That's a really cool podcast. And if you are a comic, that is really one to listen to. So look that up, because he's got some great guests, and he's got some folks that everybody knows. He's got some folks that have been around a long time, and it's a really cool podcast. So put that in your player and listen.
Yeah, Eddie Burke, who is Eddie of Eddie's Bar at the Improv, is an old friend of mine and a good guy. And he's had, a unique perch behind that bar for the last 40 some years. And this podcast is his oral history of what he's seen and heard. So you're right. It's a pretty interesting, especially if you're a comedian, it's
right.
You should.
Yeah. He knows some stuff. So after the Three Stooges stuff, I obviously listen to the podcast just for the benefit of the listeners here. What was it that made you take the jump into stand-up comedy?
You mean why did I do it?
Yeah.
I always kind of wanted to live an out of the box life, I never wanted to have a real job or go to I know it sounds terrible, but I never wanted to go to work anywhere. I wanted to just kind of exist on my own power. And when you're a stand-up comedian, it's one of those jobs that if you can get rolling, you can pretty much exist on your own energy. And it because one of the great stresses in life, I learned at a very early age, was when we're not in charge of our time. And when other people, for the sake of survival, other people own our time. So for whatever reason, I said to myself, I know this and I don't want to do that. So I got lucky. I'm really a lucky person. So to say to you, when is the first time? The first time I did it was the first time I had a chance to do it.
Right.
I never, I spent a youth of watching the Ed Sullivan Show, and comedians like Alan King and Jerry Lewis and old school guys like Bernie Burns and Larry Alpert and Mal Lawrence and Freddie Roman and all of these guys who, as I said in the improv thing, those guys had material limitations in the sense that their audience wasn't as expanded, except for like Jerry Lewis, who was, but the mechanics of what they were doing, the stagecraft and the performance and the handling of audiences and the dealing with shit, those guys were just fucking brilliant and still are.
Yeah.
So, so I watched, and I'm not a really athletic person, so these guys were my athletic heroes. I had the same affection and revere of stand-up comedians that a lot of kids when they're young have of athletes.
Yeah.
So these were my heroes. So I went I quit college after 2 years in Louisiana. So it's like I started 1967. So right before the second semester of my sophomore year, I just said, I'm not fucking happy here. I went to college with David Duke, by the way, at LSU. So, my educational claim to fame.
Did you guys hang?
I used to debate him at a place called Free Speech Alley. What happened, I quit college and talked to my dad. I'm from Pittsburgh originally. So went and talked to my dad, and he was always very supportive of me going into the entertainment. He was like the anti-father, right? Instead of saying, no, you need something to fall back on, he was like, no, do this, get famous, go, get famous, get rich, get famous. It's okay. We'll talk later. So he gave me some advice, and he said, look, go to the Catskill Mountains. My dad was he was an aluminum siding salesman, like a very hip guy. Mm-hmm. And if you want to hear a story of what my life was like with my father, write a note down to yourself, ask about the Jerry Lewis story.
Okay.
So he said, look, here's some money, go to New York, I'll buy you a ticket, but go to the Catskill Mountains, get yourself a job, you'll talk your way into a job and get it and stay there and watch those comedians. And he was right. I went there, and I was able to con my way by lying and completely misleading people about what skill I possessed, I had got a job. I became the stage manager of the Raleigh Hotel in South Fallsburg, which was not as big as the Concord, which was close by, but it was like the second biggest hotel in the mountains, and had talent, A-level talent. So I worked there, and while I was there, because I was the stage manager, I ran the lights, and especially the spotlight. I saw like every fucking comedian on that circuit multiple times. I saw them when they were great. I saw them when they bombed. I knew what the new material. Like I saw them so many times, I began to understand the construction of a stand-up act. I don't believe I intellectualized it like that back then, but I could tell when their acts were changing. I could tell when, I learned to read audiences from these guys, because when you see some in a room of like 1,500 people consistently, right? And this hunk works. And then one night this hunk doesn't work. That's not a fucking accident. There's a reason why. You just have to figure it out, right?
Yeah.
So, I understood the ebb and flow of material. I got an extraordinary education, just watching. And in the time I was doing, I listened and learned how stand-up jokes were constructed, and that became for me the foundation of everything. And then one of the guys I worked with was a comedian by the name of London Lee. Whose entire act was based on the premise that he was like the poor little rich kid, right? And his father really was. Have you ever heard of London Lee? You know what I'm talking about?
No.
Okay. So back then, he was a very successful comedian who had done the Tonight Show, because remember the Carson Show back then was in New York. So he had done Merv Griffin, he had done Carson, he'd done a lot of TV shows. So he was very well known. And he was losing his road manager, the guy who worked with him, and he offered me a job. So I left the Catskills and went to work with him, and he got me a place to stay, and and I ended up driving his car almost every day. So, and he paid me a decent amount of money for the time. And I got a lot of clothes, a lot of custom made clothes. So it was a great gig. And I with him, it started out where I was just his valet. Like I drive and I carry his shit. And then every now and then I started out saying, "Hey, London, what do you think of this joke?" And there was one time I gave him a joke and he loved it. He just said, "This is great. I'll do this tonight." So he did it and it got a big laugh and it became part of his act. And then I started to feed him jokes. And then we started doing a bit that he had and he felt comfortable with me. And then that led to one night we're at a hotel called the Nevele. Again, very similar to the Raleigh, like, somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500 people in the audience.
Mm-hmm.
And we had this little bit that we did where halfway through his act, he would say to me, say to the audience rather, "I'm a little thirsty. I need some water." And then he would turn to the wings and say, "Hey, Mark, bring me some water." So I'd come out with some water and then we do the bit, right? "Who am I?" He would say. I would say, "You're the boss." And he said, "Who are you?" I said, "Me, I'm nothing." And then he would say, "Well, what does that make me?" And I said, "That makes you the boss over nothing." Like you just did, the audience would laugh, right?
Yeah.
So this particular night, we do the bit. He's sitting on a stool. We do the bit, and I turn to exit the same way I do all the time. And he whispers to me, "Hang on." And I turn and I said, "What?" He said, "I'm a little tired. You want to do your comedy? You want to do a few minutes?" And, wow. And I'm on stage, right? I'm there. I'm fucking there.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking to myself, well, look, man, shit or get off the pot. This is it. You either do it now or you don't do it at all. So I said, fuck yeah, and I grabbed the mic and I did, 3, 5, 6 minutes. And the audience seemed to like it. I got applause. And I walked off and I leaned over to him and I said, "Was that okay?" And he said, "Get the fuck off the stage."
Now this, I think, is a teachable moment. This is for the benefit of comics coming up and wanting to know what to do. What you just talked about is something I talked to another very new comic about, and he had gotten invited to do an MC spot for a band, I think it was, and he was scared to death. He says, "I'm not ready," and I agreed. I said, "You're not ready, but you have to push yourself. And as long as the job you take isn't going to ruin your cred, you should take it and get out of your comfort zone and find out what works and what doesn't work." And what you did is exactly that.
Oh yeah. I mean, you have there are these moments in your life, especially when you're pursuing a career that's based on who you are, right?
Mm-hmm.
So as opposed to the day job thing. But there are these moments in your life when, because you're in this arena where it's all you, where you gotta say to yourself, yeah, maybe I think I'm not ready, but who the fuck am I? If the opportunity is here, the worst I can do is fail. So what?
Right.
I've had bad shows. I've had times when I write a joke, and earlier on, not so much anymore, but I have to give myself some credit.
Yeah,
but
you do. Yeah.
I've had shows where, no, I know when jokes work because I've had to feed a wife and kids by writing these jokes. So I kind of siphon out the bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
Not that I don't write it. I kind of know it when I see it, and I know. But you got to go through that. You have to. It's a rite of passage. Do you ever watch The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel?
My wife and I don't miss it. But we just devour seasons. Season 3's done already.
Dude, I didn't snort cocaine as fast as I snort those episodes.
Yep.
Right? That's the best show about someone in stand-up I've ever seen, because it's entertaining, and it's got beautiful sets, and the writing is just fucking brilliant, and it's directed beautifully, and it really creates a world. You know, you're there in that world, and I would suggest anybody from any era of any age wanting to break into stand-up, watch that show from the beginning and understand the bridge between your stage life and your off-stage life.
Yeah. That first show, when, you know, knowing when you bomb and how to come back from that first show here in the third season, when she opened up for Shy, and she just bombed. And
yeah. Hey, listen, that's what I learned up in the Catskills. When I mentioned that I saw guys, comedians and women, I saw them do material and kill with it. And then the very next time, same exact material, and it tanks. And after a while, you know, you can't just keep saying, well, why does that happen? You know,
yeah.
You gotta, well, why does that happen? I don't know, man. Why you keep asking why it happens? Figure it out now, you know? So that's what you got to do. And you got to take chances. You got to fucking take chances.
Yeah.
You can't grow unless you take chances. This is a risky business emotionally.
It is. Yeah. And one of the things I found is that people get emotionally attached to their bits, and they just won't let it go, even though it just dies all the time. And, you know, because I think you understand, because you were raising kids and a family with your jokes, you got to treat it like a business. So if you do it 3 times and it sucks, it's time to get rid of that joke.
Nobody wants to be that writer in a writer's room at 11 o'clock at night on the final rewrite, pushing a joke for the 6th time that nobody laughed for 5 times.
Yeah.
You learn not to do that, because you don't want to be the thing that causes people to roll their eyes.
Yep.
You know, that's not what you want.
That is so true. So, you know, this is kind of a teaching podcast, but I just think it's totally cool. Your first movie role. Can you go into that a little bit?
Yes. One day when I was living in New York, when I was in my early 20s, and when I was about 20, I had a manager, Lloyd Greenfield and Associates. Dick Towers was the guy who managed me. They managed Tom Jones and Engelbert Humperdinck, so you know they were like a legit management firm. And one day I walked into the office, and Dick said to me, I have a movie audition for you. I said, sure. So he gives me an address, and he gives me 2 names, a guy named Wes and a guy named Sean, at some office in the 40s between 5th and 6th. And so I go down there, and I go into the office. I see these 2 guys about my age, maybe a little older, one, the Wes guy and the Sean guy, right? And I read a scene, and I head back to Dick's office. And by the time I had gotten back there, they called and said, we want him. And now I'll tell you, Wes was Wes Craven.
Yeah.
And Sean was Sean Cunningham.
Wow.
And the film was the original Last House on the Left, of which I was one of the 4 stars. Wow.
And that's just like horror movie gold right there.
Apparently it is, because it keeps, you know, it really just keeps on going.
Yeah. The funny thing is if you know me, I'm like an outlier. I don't care about like Star Wars or Marvel movies or anything like that, but I love old horror movies. And, you know, really the 70s back is what I like. I like the old Hammer films and stuff like that. And there's a group of three of us that get together and talk about horror movies. And the fact that I talk to you is just going to give me so much cred with those guys. They're going to fucking eat it up. It's going to be great.
No, seriously, Scott, it's like fucking amazing. You know, my wife, my current wife is my second wife. Patty and I have been together, like, I think we're beginning our 17th year together.
Mm-hmm.
So, and she's Colombian. So but lived in LA, but she wasn't a horror movie fan, you know, like a slasher horror movie fan, you know, supernatural movies. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So I've learned in my life that especially living in Los Angeles, there would come that point in every dating experience when I would either fess up to being in Last House or try to deny it.
Yeah.
Okay. No, because it's I've had an emotional roller coaster ride with it on the good side now. But so I told my wife about it. And that was right around the time that David Hess, who played my father in the film,
Mm-hmm.
David and I were best friends. David got me into going to a horror film. He took me to my first horror film convention, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I sat there, and he told me, he said, "Dude, you're not going to believe it." He said, "I sit there and I sell my CDs, and you know, I sell my pictures." I said, "You sell them?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, autographs, and, you know, they give me this and that. He said, "Do you have any pictures?" And I said, "No." He said, "That's okay. We'll just sell your signature." And I said, "David, you know, you're out of your fucking mind. No one's going to do that." So sure enough, we went to this place, this one that was in LA near Universal. And everybody, you know, these people came to David's table, and he's signing his name and he's selling. And he would just point to me and go, "Oh, there's Junior. There's Junior." And all of a sudden, I'm signing like arms and pictures, pictures of me. I've signed breasts, men and women, you know, and once a German Shepherd.
Wow.
So, you know, it's become this surreal fucking part of my life. Like a few times a year, I go to these conventions, and I'm like celebrity in a box. You know, my film career into a little box with some memorabilia, and it's amazing. So yeah, you never fucking know.
Yeah, that's, you know, that movie, that's one of them that lives on. It's up there with Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It just keeps going.
We were before Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yeah.
And the reason I think, and I've only recently discovered this, I'd say in the last, you know, 3-4 years, I began to hear from fans. I could never figure out why or how young people continue to be attracted to this film. Like succeeding generations of younger people, like 13, 14, 15 years ago. I could never kind of figure that. It didn't make any sense to me until one time a young girl, like 13, 14, came over with a copy of the film, a DVD, one of my signature. And she's the one who taught it to me. She said, "My dad made me watch this film." She said, "My parents made me watch this film because they wanted me to understand what could happen if I made wrong decisions."
Yeah.
And then I started to hear that from a bunch of people in that same generation, in that same general age group. So I think that's the reason. I think that part of it is that, you know, parents who are horror film fans say to their kids, "Hey, this is a great horror film," or parents who are Wes Craven fans say, "This is Wes Craven." I mean, there are a bunch of different reasons, but that one about it being passed on as a cautionary tale has made its way to me more than enough times that I should pay attention to it.
Mm-hmm. And that was Wes's first feature, right?
Wes's absolutely first
Yeah.
feature.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he, you know, he went on to do Nightmare on Elm Street and all those movies that everybody knows.
And was a good guy.
Yeah.
He was a really, really nice guy. Yeah, I saw him I hadn't seen him in a while, and I saw him I'd say about a year before he passed away. Somebody in LA had done a multimedia art rendering of moments from his films, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they did him, and they knew somebody who knew me. So Wes and I ended up getting invited together, and we spent a terrific half hour catching up, and pretty much the same guy, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I remember.
Yeah,
Yeah.
from his interviews, he just sounds like a regular guy.
Totally. Soft-spoken.
Yeah, horror genius. So
Knew how to tell a story. You know, that had an innate sense of story.
yeah. Well, that's a cool story. One question I have to ask, because my buddies and I are really into practical effects.
Sure.
How did they fuck up your teeth so bad? Was there something that stuck to them?
It's just black wax.
Okay, and it stayed during all those scenes, huh? None of it fell out.
Remember that all those scenes were shot over a period of 20 days. So
yeah,
what they do, that they would do this. They put it on and get it where they like it. Take Polaroids of it and keep take 3 or 4 Polaroids of it so that they have them. Then they just recreate it every day.
Yeah.
It's liquid in the jar, and then you paint it on,
and
it's called tooth wax.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I've always wondered about that. You know, I've never done any practical effects myself, but I'm like, you know, how do you do that? So that's cool. So obviously, you know, you did stand up for a while. What were your main clubs when you kind of broke out of the Catskills thing?
Well, what happened when I broke out of the Catskills thing was I went from that to New York, and I hung out at the Improv and just kind of watched and learned, right? And at the same time, I was going out and on auditions and doing that. And one of the auditions I had, there was a commercial director in New York. Well, he had offices all over the world, but he was in New York at the time. Lee Lacey, he's the guy who did that famous Coke NFL Mean Joe Green commercial.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
He's the guy who directed that, won a Clio for it. And he was, I got to know Lee pretty well. He was a decent, very cool guy. He had this kind of international cool about him. You know, he was one of these guys who was so like tapped in everywhere he needed to go. He never carried any luggage when he traveled internationally.
Mm-hmm.
He had a fucking car and an office and clothes. Everything he needed was in every place he needed to go. And if it wasn't, he'd have it sent there.
Yeah.
He was like the James Bond of fucking commercial directors, right? and he was a really cool guy and a nice wife and kids, and he was very fucking cool. So I did a commercial for him called for Metropolitan Life Assurance, and we kind of became friendly. So I, through Last House on the Left, discovered that if you're in a movie, you get girls pretty easily. Weird, right? I sound so old because I'm so happily married now, but I was, 20 years old then.
Mm-hmm.
So because of Last House, they opened after the Roger, about the Roger Ebert review, right?
Yeah, I mean, that film was supposed to be like shot, go to drive-ins and die, and Ebert just really took it.
It was supposed to be the film that people bought their snacks for the next film. Yeah. While it was right.
Yeah.
Okay. So disgusting. So Hess and I are in New York, and we're walking around fucking the city and seeing all these posters. And one day Roger Ebert writes a 4.5-star review, and the next day there are lines wrapped around the block in Manhattan for people to see this movie. So that created a buzz about all of us, right? Mm-hmm. The distributors who had already by then made their money back said they're going to open the film in Pittsburgh. Would I go and, promo it there? So I said, yeah, sure. So I go to Pittsburgh and I do some local TV. I do an interview in the newspaper. They get a limo for me. They bring me to the theater, which coincidentally was managed by my father's cousin, who was the general manager of the theater chain that booked it. And I used to go to that theater as a kid and watch myself and in my head on the screen and pretend that I was in a movie that was projected onto that screen, right? So then, like 15 years later, 12 years later, there I am fucking doing that exact thing that I fantasized about. And here comes the best part for me back then. Several women, young girls from my high school graduating class, who a short 2.5 years earlier wouldn't give me the fucking time of day, now suddenly standing in line to drop their drawers.
Yeah.
And as I've said many times, I recall being with one of them and thinking to myself, I believe I have made the correct career choice.
Yeah.
Wow. So then
for sure.
Yeah, but you see that's I was plucking my own twanger then, because that particular juice was very short-lived.
Yeah.
And movies come and movies go, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there are once that wave had hit the beach, I was just another out-of-work actor again. And trust me, nothing causes a woman's body parts to stay dry like telling you you're an out-of-work actor in New York. Okay? That's like, man, let me tell you. So I'm at a party one night and I'm lonely as shit, right? And I see a guy talking to a hot girl, like a model-looking girl, and I edged myself closer to him. They were near the food, so I kind of pretended I was hungry, which I was. So I listened, and this guy is telling this girl, "Well, yes, I'm in the middle of developing my characters and trying to decide on who's the protagonist and what the journey is. And then I've constructed some scenes in the back, and I'm listening, and this girl is fucking hypnotized. I don't know what this fucker is saying, but this girl is hypnotized." So it turns out he was telling her he was a writer, and, that just, wow. And they left together. So I said to myself, I could do that. I could tell girls I'm a writer. So went out and bought a bunch of books, right? And learned some shit, learned the words, and and went to parties, socialized, and suddenly I was a writer. And I was getting laid again, and I was a writer. And so one night I'm at a party, and I'm talking to some girl, and as usual, it's working. And I get a tap on my shoulder, and it turns out it's Lee Lacey, right? And he said to me, "Hey, listen, I have an office in California. I'd love to see that script when you're finished because I want to get it to my agent. I think we could make a deal on that. That's fucking great." So I took him aside and I said, "Hey, look, dude, I got to be honest with you, guy to guy. I'm just doing this to get laid. There's no script. There's no anything. I'm just lying to get to be with someone." And he started laughing and he said to me, "Is it working for you?" I said, "Oh yeah, it works all the time." He said, "Then you're an idiot. You need to be writing for real." He said, "Man, if you can get women to drop their pants for your words, can you imagine what would happen if you actually wrote something?"
Oh, most definitely.
So I took his advice. I wrote a script, and he gave it to his agent in L.A., a guy, the late Stan Kamen at William Morris. And suddenly I was a sold writer with a plane ticket to L.A. and a car and an office and an apartment and an agent, and there I was. Wow. I landed surfing on a wave.
That is a cool story. Remind me what that first script was.
That was I'll remind you in a form of a lesson. Okay.
Okay.
the script was called The Unseen.
Right.
And it was the storyline was a bunch of venomous snakes escaped from a crashed truck in Central Park on a beautiful spring day. And when there's supposed to be, a political rally and a bunch of things, and it's just a snakes in a park kind of thing, right?
Uh-huh.
And it never got made because the lesson I learned in television was they bought it, NBC bought it, they paid me, they had everything set up to start making the film with lead directing, and then suddenly there was a regime change at the top of NBC, and when that happens, what mostly always happens is they sweep away all the projects that are not actually in production, and then they bring in all new stuff because the people who now take over don't want to deal with other people's shit.
Mm-hmm.
They want shit, and was a interesting lesson. And I rationalized and said, well, okay, I sold the script. I got into the Writers Guild. I now have health insurance. I now have a huge chunk of money in the bank. I have an agent. I have an office. Not so bad.
Worse things can happen.
Of course. I could still be, driving a cab in New York.
Yeah. Now I got to ask, so you did a movie about snakes in a park. Did you get anything from Snakes in a Plane then?
No, this was in 1976, so it was a little before that.
I know, but maybe they borrowed from it. Maybe somebody got a hold of it.
Oh, really? You really can't borrow or anything. It's just, venomous snake around people who don't want to get bitten. How fucking difficult can that be?
Did anybody in your script say, get these motherfucking snakes out of this motherfucking park?
No.
Okay. Okay. I guess they're clear then.
That's Mr. Jackson.
Okay.
Bailiwick, not mine.
I'm sorry. I just saw a parallel there.
No, you go right ahead.
Yeah. So you really got into the writing before you started doing the stand up out of the Catskills then.
Yeah. So what happened was in a meeting, my agents at William Morris said to me, what else do you want to do? Because they really didn't know that much about me. So I kind of told them, I gave them a history of, especially about my stand-up stuff. And I said, yeah, I knew that Bud had opened an Improv in in LA. So I had already started to hang out there. I wasn't yet performing there, but because I knew Bud and I knew the crew, or, I knew what it was a good place for me to go. And it was down the block from where I lived and where the office was. So they asked me if I wanted to do a set at the Comedy Store. And I said, sure. So they said to me, a couple of days later, they said they got a call back from Mitzi Shore, I'm talking about. Mm. And she said she wouldn't give me any real spots until she sees me, but she would agree, because it's William Morris calling, that she would give me a definite time on a Monday night. So, I didn't argue about that. I said, sure, no problem. So I set that date, and then prior to that, went to the Comedy Store, because I have this quirk about, I don't really like to play places that I haven't seen. I haven't sat in the audience and listened and watched and, kind of like soaked in the vibe. Mm-hmm. I always try to go places first, just anonymously, just to kind of listen,
right,
and feel the vibe of the place. Maybe that's my hippie shit, but that's just how. So I started watching, Steve Bluestein and Jimmy Walker, and some guys, and some really, really good comedians, and Tom and his former partner Tim Reed, and Kurt Pryor, and I thought, wow, this fucking Catskill Mountain shit, I don't know, I need some new material. So I ended up having to write. I wrote a brand new 5 minutes that was more LA. It was more geared towards, this was, right around the time that Star Wars came out in May. There was a lot of press about that. So I wrote material that was much more Hotel California-ish, and I did it 5 minutes. I didn't have any problem with the performing because I had done all those club dates in the Catskills. So I did it once and it went fine. And I did it second time and it went fine. And then the third time I did it, it was one of those wonderful kismet moments where its audience is great. And, there's a lot of energy. The couple of comedians on before me did very well, which brings the energy of the room up. Never be afraid of comedians on, in front of you doing well, because that just means all your job is, they're already primed. Your job is just like, keep them there.
Right.
Just move the needle maybe a little. Don't never be afraid of that. So these guys had done well, and I went on stage and I did very well. It was a quick 5 minutes and everything worked. And I walked off to applause, and I saw Mitzi sitting there. And I go back to what I said. Every now and then you get these moments when you got to fucking captain your own ship.
Mm-hmm.
I saw her there, and she knew who I was, and we exchanged hellos and whatever, and she knew I was the guy William Morris was pushing. And I just walked right up to her. I said, Mitzi, is it going to get any better than this? Does it need to be better than this? And she just looked at me and she said, okay, Mark, call in for spots. And that's how I became a regular. And I'm actually considered to be one of the Comedy Store's original paid regulars, because this happened in 1976 pre-strike.
Yeah.
So so I'm in that class of 77,
mm-hmm.
that famous class of 77.
That's you, Leno, Letterman, Threesome,
Michael Keaton, Mike Binder, Argus Hamilton, Johnny Witherspoon, who sadly just passed away, Paul Mooney, Richard and Jimmy Walker. They were ahead of us, so they not really part of that crew.
Mm-hmm.
Robin for sure. We were all, I closed my eyes and we were just all hanging together. We were just in that time. Richard Lewis, part of that.
Mm-hmm.
You could, at any given moment back in those days, like you could walk into the Improv, and if you just freeze frame, you could look and see like Richard Lewis with Larry David, with Marvin Braverman talking to, it was just the Robin, and it's just fucking amazing.
If I could go back in time, I guess that's where I'd go, just to be in the audience to watch you guys. It was
such a reality and a day-to-day existence right now, back then. But when I look back on it, knowing what the truth was and what it really was, it's suddenly become surreal that I could have been part of that.
Mm-hmm.
That I was actually part of that. My name's on the wall. The Comedy Store has been on there for 40 years. Mitzi put it on in like 1977 or something.
Mm.
However ago that is. Yeah. It just, I'm really shocked at the fact that I did all that shit. It's weird, and I'm still doing it. I'm still working. I'm still doing shit.
Right. So, you did a few years at that, and you kept on writing for TV shows and movies and stuff like that. So you had that going on as well. Obviously, I think the writing part probably, made your career more than the stand-up, but which one did you like doing better?
I like doing stand-up more than anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the most fun I've ever had with my clothes on.
Yeah.
And now that I'm like 70, it's probably the most fun I'm ever going to have.
Yeah.
So it's literally the most fun. My wife even tells me that she watches, and I don't even perform as myself. I'll send you a link to some current stand-up stuff I'm doing. That I did the Comedy Store tonight with Argus Hamilton. Argus and I are old friends.
Uh-huh.
So I'll send you the link to that. You'll see me performing stand up, but not as me as a character. You'll get that. But I really, there's just something about it, man. There's just, when you get so comfortable that you're not cocky and you're not arrogant,
Mm-hmm.
you get comfortable on stage. It just feels good. It just like really fucking feels good to know that you're about to say something and they're all going to react and they're all going to do, and you're moving the audience around gently, but you're moving them around.
Right.
There's something to that.
Well, all these people that, people like Conan and all those folks that, they did stand up, they did writing, and then they got famous. They all keep coming back to doing stand up. So even when they were writing, they'd sneak out and go do a open mic somewhere because there's no way to explain the rush you get when you do a good 5-10 minutes. There
isn't. There's just no way. It's like how to release endorphins.
Right. And really, I have to say, when you're working on it, there's no feeling like even having a shitty set, because at least you know where you stand when you walk away from it.
Look, it's one of those professions where the rubber really does meet the road.
Yeah.
There's no getting around it. You just that's where it is. It's like that moment that I had with London at that hotel. It's step up or step out.
Yeah.
You may have to step out a few times before you get it together to step up, and then sometimes you just got to say to yourself, "Fuck it, man, this ain't happening." Like I walked off the stage. I didn't know Mitzi Shore from anything except that she was the owner of that store.
Uh-huh.
And I wasn't getting anywhere unless I got through her.
Yeah.
And so I listened to the wave of the audience and the applause and the laughs, and I surfed right under her table on that wave, not on a knock on the door. I used that energy, and it worked.
Yep.
Another fucking time I got lucky.
Yep. You got to know when to take it. That's for sure. So I do want to talk about your new act a little bit, because you've been doing it for a couple years, and obviously I know what you're doing because you hadn't been on the stage for a while, and you start getting itchy. It's kind of like a Coke addiction, and you want to get back to it. So tell me a little bit about the new act that you're doing.
So about 4 years ago, I got hit by a car in my neighborhood, Toluca Lake, and I got really, really, really racked up badly. A lot of broken bones and a lot of shit. I'm okay now, but it's been a trip. So when I was in the hospital, they'd give me a bunch of drugs, and as I'm sure you know, drugs have a way of making your mind go to strange places.
Yeah.
Where I went was back to my stand-up days, and just in my mind's eye, just being able to watch my life then, not just me doing stand-up, but just my whole life, just how it felt to be that, to have a house in Laurel Canyon and bump down to the Comedy Store and then the Improv and meet these guys and sit and hang out and write jokes with Letterman. And, just that whole thing served as a kind of self-producing medication for me.
Mm-hmm.
My brain, you feel good to get rid of the pain. So I decided then that maybe I'll go back and do stand-up. So I wrote some shit, and then I looked at it, and I hung out at the Comedy Store a while because they're nice to all of us, original guys who are names on the wall kind of people. I go and I hung out, and I wasn't really intimidated. I just kind of came to the conclusion that no one's going to really give a shit, and I'm just an old guy, and I had a career, and move over. It's time for somebody else, right? And I get that. I don't fault the business for being like that. I don't fault audiences for being like that. It's just the way it is. So I then put it aside. I was pissed off, and I put it aside. I figured, well, I'll just go write something else. I'll write a book or something. Then one day I was getting out of the shower, and I looked at myself in the mirror, and my hair was wet, and beard. I have a long beard, and my beard was all stringy and dripping, and I got really down on myself. I just said, you old fuck, it's all you are as an old man. Just some old motherfucker that nobody wants to hear. I just beat the shit out of myself verbally until I couldn't take it. I couldn't take myself anymore, and all of a sudden, I started to get a twinkle in my eye because I knew that a thought was coming to me. So I pointed at myself and I said, like, don't go away, something like that. And I ran into my closet and I had a wardrobe vision in my head, and I put on a black suit with a white shirt and a black tie, and I grabbed a fedora from my hat collection, and I looked at myself in the mirror when I got back into the bathroom, and I looked like a combination of my maternal grandfather and the rabbi from the synagogue that we belonged to, the Orthodox synagogue that we belonged to when I was a kid. And when I opened my mouth, what came out were words with a Jewish accent, an old Eastern European Yiddish accent. And because when I was a kid, like I'm 70, right? But when I was a kid, all old men looked like that.
Yeah.
So I started talking, and I looked at myself and I said, now they'll listen. And I just got so inspired that I went to work, and for 6 months I wrote and feverishly. I just wouldn't, did nothing but write jokes for this guy. And I did a character who in the mythology is a retired kosher chef who now wants to be a comedian. And so, yeah, I've been doing that since September. I went on stage the first time late September of 2017.
One thing I want to say, I'm 55, so I'm a few years younger than you, but one of the things that works for me, and I use it whenever I can, there's a novelty about being the oldest person on the stage. And
yes, sir.
And I will use that novelty thing all the time. And you really need to have two different acts. If the majority of the audience is your age or older, then you got one act. And if they're young, it's a young audience, you got another act. So it's I use it to my advantage, and I think everybody, if you're old and you're in comedy, you should.
Well, what I've learned is that with this particular character, because he looks the way I'm gonna send you the link in a minute.
Okay,
you can see this particular character comes with a kind of authority or wisdom that I probably don't possess personally, because I'm mostly immature. So this is a chance for me to be an old guy and then get out of it, 20 minutes later. So I don't know. It seems to work. I've done when you see this character, I will tell you that I have worked in front of all entirely African American audiences as this character, and fine. I've worked with millennial, young, all kind of mixed millennials, Hispanics. Just the character is such that people like him, and he has wisdom and a whimsy and a kind of a whimsical. He's like a whimsical advice giver. So I don't know. What can I say? I just, as long as they keep laughing, I'm okay with it.
Yeah. It's just, there's nothing better. And, I've maintained since I started doing stand-up that it's really one of the highest form of arts out there because, it's the only form of art that you just go up and throw up on stage. Musicians, they practice and practice and practice. If you're a stage actor, you've got a script. If you work in painting or sculpture, if you screw it up, you can fix it. But when you're on the stage in the moment, there's nothing like stand up. I don't think anything matches that.
Rubber meets the road, Scott.
Yeah.
That's what I like about it, because it's always on the edge.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you're always on the edge. You're a half a beat away from failure and a half a beat away from success.
Yep.
You're right on the edge.
Yeah. It's really funny. I had decided to take this month off of getting on stage at all because my dad had surgery, and I'm taking him to rehab and stuff like that, and just generally busy. And I wanted to sit back and look at what I've written and what's good and what's not good. And one of my friends had a birthday, so there was an open mic this last Tuesday. And I went in and I went ahead and put myself on the list and decided I wasn't going to do any material at all. I was just going to roast everybody in the room. And that actually turned out better than most of my acts. So, I made a split decision in the moment, and it worked.
Okay. There you go.
Yeah. So do you... Getting back to stand up and talking about what works and what doesn't work. Do you keep an eye on the new comics out there now?
If I run into somebody, I don't search it out. If somebody I work with or do a show with.
Mm-hmm. How do you feel that the medium has changed since you did it the first time?
I think too many people want to be comedians.
Yeah.
I think not enough people know that there's a huge difference between being the funny guy at a party and standing on a stage and commanding an audience.
Mm-hmm.
I think that a lot of people want to be comedians because they think it's easy and don't realize how difficult it is. Not just the being funny part, but, understanding, growth and creative growth and, narrative and moving forward. And I mean, it's, a lot of people don't know what a fucking punchline is.
Exactly. Yep.
So.
And it takes, if it's funny, it really takes time to get that. And, You can't even expect to have a good 5 minutes until you've been doing it at least a year. I think you got a little bit of a leg up because you were watching it for so long. But I didn't feel like I was even close to funny until I had a year under my belt.
Yeah. See, I've never in my life been anything but funny.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Screw you then, Mark.
No. Now I'm going to tell you the Jerry Lewis story.
Okay.
Yeah, I want to explain what I said. Right. I'm a product of my environment. My father was a very fast talking, slick aluminum siding salesman.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So in the summer times, because I was raised by a single father, I had nowhere to go. So a lot of times I'd go on the road with him. He would do day trips, right?
Mm-hmm.
In aluminum siding, there's a canvasser guy who knocks on the door, goes in neighborhoods and knocks on the door and sees if anybody's been thinking about remodeling their house. And then there's a guy called the closer. This is Mr. Slick, the guy the man from the factory, the boss, the big time, cheese, right? And he's only going to be here today. So if you're interested, it's a sales pitch, right?
Right.
So my father had a routine from being on the road with him so much. I knew his routine. I knew that if he came out of the house to start measuring, what that means is that the people inside have asked him to give them a price. So that I knew it was going well, right?
Mm.
And I also knew when it wasn't going well, like when my father would just come out and just get in the car and whatever. So we'd leave. So one particular time, I'm in the car by myself. The canvasser's in the house with my dad. The door opens up. And my dad comes out, but he doesn't start measuring the house. What he does is he walks towards the car. So I said, "What's up?" And he said, "It's a little weird in there, but I think we're making progress." Then my dad just said to me, "Hey, listen, coincidence beyond coincidences. These people are huge Jerry Lewis fans."
Uh-huh.
Right? He said, "Yeah, they're huge Jerry Lewis fans." So I told him I got a kid in the car, and he does a great Jerry Lewis impression. So I'm going to bring them to the door, and when I wave to you and they wave to you, just kind of stick your head out of the car and do the wildest Jerry Lewis impression you could come up with.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, "Yeah, sure, okay." So he goes back in the house. I keep my eye on the door. 5-10 minutes later, door opens up. There are two people out of a Grant Wood novel, a portrait, standing at the door, Mom and Pop, and my dad and the canvasser. And all four of them wave at me. So that was my cue, right? So I stick my head out of the window and Dr. Birnbaum, Dr. Hello, Dean, hello, whatever, I don't know. So I do this for like 45 seconds. And the people just are shaking their heads and they're applauding me like this. They go back in. I go in the car. I take a nap, and I hear my dad coming out, and he's got the contract under his arm, and he's smiling, and his cigar is lit. Canvasser gets in the car. My dad gets in the car. We drive away. So as we're driving back to Pittsburgh, I say to my dad, "Wow, who would have figured that out here, Jerry Lewis fans?" So the canvasser says, "What do you mean Jerry Lewis fans?" So I turn around and said, "My dad told me that these people were Jerry Lewis fans. This is why I did the Jerry Lewis impression." So the canvasser starts laughing. He says, "No, what your dad told him was that his son was in the car and that you forgot his medicine in Pittsburgh." They weren't really interested. They were going to have to leave, and to prove it, he'll show you how badly his son needs his medicine. So that's how I grew up. The world I came out of. Is it any surprise, right? Is it any fucking surprise that I do what I do? No. The surprise would have if I would have gone into the normal world.
Oh yeah, yeah. Yeah, I've spent too many years in the normal world.
That's one of many stories.
That's just hilarious. What if you were to be mentoring a new comic or somebody who's just been doing it for a few months, what do you think are the top 3 things that they should do to become successful?
Learn to listen, not take orders, but learn to listen to audiences and to other comedians. Understand what a punchline is, and find your own voice.
Mm-hmm.
Write material that only you could do. Find your particular point of view.
Mm-hmm. That's that's pretty common among everybody I've talked to. That first of all, everybody's going to tell you what the rules of comedy are, and none of them are right. And second off, until you find your voice, you're not going to be truly funny.
That's right.
Yeah.
Find your voice is the most important thing.
Yeah. Because it's got to come from the heart.
That's it.
Yeah. Well, I tell you, Mark, this has been a fantastic conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your time with your wife's family to talk to me. I'm amazed at how generous the comedy folks are when you reach out to them with something brand new, and you and Tom, and I got a couple younger ones that I've talked to, and it's just fantastic that you guys are so generous with your time.
No problem. We're all just renting anyway.
Yep. My guest today was Marc Sheffler, and you can find him all over YouTube. And I'm also going to, I saw you sent me that link. If you don't mind, I'll put that in the show notes.
Sure.
Okay, cool. Well, thanks a lot, Mark. I really appreciate you being on the show.
My pleasure. Have a good one. Good luck with this.
Thank you.